I was helping my neighbor Sarah move boxes again. The afternoon sun streamed through the dusty windows of her two-story colonial house, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors that creaked under our footsteps. Box after box, each one heavier than the last, filled with memories of a life I couldn't begin to understand. But it wasn't the weight of the cardboard that made my heart race. It was the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't watching. Those deep green eyes that seemed to hold decades of stories I desperately wanted to hear. Sarah Martinez, 52 years old, recently divorced, and completely off limits to someone like me. I'm 28, fresh out of graduate school, and according to everyone in our small Connecticut town, way too young to understand what real love means. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But here's the thing about understanding. Sometimes it hits you like lightning when you least expect it. And sometimes it grows slowly, like the ivy that climbed the brick walls of Sarah's house, taking root in places you never thought possible. 3 months ago, when I moved into the apartment above Mr. Peterson's garage across the street, I never imagined I'd be spending my weekends carrying boxes, fixing leaky faucets, falling hopelessly in love with a woman who insisted I was just a kid playing grown-up games. The moving truck had arrived that morning, a massive white beast that blocked half of Maple Street. Sarah stood on her front porch in a loose-fitting gray sweater and dark jeans, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, directing the movers with the kind of calm authority that made my stomach flip. She was moving out of the house she'd shared with her ex-husband for 15 years, starting over in a smaller place across town. The divorce had been finalized just 2 weeks earlier, and the whole neighborhood was buzzing with whispered conversations and stolen glances. I'd been washing my car in Mr. Peterson's driveway when I saw her struggling with a particularly heavy, box-marked kitchen, fragile in her careful handwriting. Without thinking, I jogged across the street, my sneakers slapping against the warm asphalt. "Let me help you with that," I said, reaching for the box before she could protest. Our fingers brushed for just a moment as she reluctantly let go, and I felt that familiar electric current that had been building between us for weeks. "You don't have to do this, Marcus," she said, using my name in that soft way that made me forget how to breathe properly. "I'm sure you have better things to do on a Saturday than help your old neighbor pack up her life." There it was again. That subtle reminder of our age difference, the invisible wall she kept building between us every time we got too close. "Actually, I don't," I replied, hefting the box easily and following her toward the moving truck. "And you're not old, Sarah, you're just experienced." She laughed at that, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but I caught the way her cheeks flushed pink before she turned away. The truth was, I'd been looking for an excuse to spend time with her ever since the day I moved in. Sarah wasn't like the girls I'd dated in college or the women I'd met at graduate school mixers. She didn't play games or send mixed signals. When she smiled, it reached her eyes. When she spoke, every word seemed carefully chosen and genuinely meant. She had this way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. And when she laughed at something I said, it felt like winning the lottery. But our friendship, if that's what you could call it, existed in a strange sort of limbo. We'd chat over the fence when I was getting my mail, or she'd wave from her garden when I was heading to work at the engineering firm downtown. Sometimes, she'd bring me leftover soup when she made too much, always with some excuse about not wanting it to go to waste. I'd find reasons to check on her when storms knocked out power on our street, or offer to help with yard work when her lawnmower wouldn't start. Everyone in the neighborhood had opinions about Sarah's divorce. Mrs. Chen from the corner house made sure to tell me all about how Harold Martinez had left his wife for his 25-year-old dental hygienist. "Midlife crisis," she'd said, with a knowing nod, as if that explained everything. Men his age think they can turn back the clock by dating girls young enough to be their daughters. The irony wasn't lost on me, considering I was probably closer in age to Harold's new girlfriend than to Sarah herself.
Ow.
My own family had their thoughts too. My sister Emma, who was 31 and recently engaged to her longtime boyfriend, couldn't understand why I'd moved to such a quiet suburban neighborhood instead of getting an apartment in the city like a normal single guy my age. "What are you going to do there, Marcus? Join the PTA. Start a book club, she'd teased during our last phone call. You need to meet someone your own age and settle down before you turn into one of those weird bachelor uncles who collects model trains. My parents were more diplomatic but equally concerned. They'd raised me to be responsible and mature, but they worried I was taking it too far. You're in your prime, son, my father had said during our monthly dinner at their house. In Hartford, don't waste these years hiding away in suburbia. Get out there, meet people, have adventures. There's plenty of time for quiet neighborhoods when you're 40, but they didn't understand what I'd found on Maple Street. They didn't know about the way Sarah's face lit up when she talked about her job as a high school art teacher or how passionate she became when describing her students' projects. They'd never seen her in her garden at sunset, humming softly to herself as she watered her tomato plants, completely unaware that I was watching from my bedroom window like some lovesick teenager. They definitely didn't know about the night 3 weeks ago, when a severe thunderstorm had knocked out power to half the neighborhood. I'd been reading by candlelight when I heard a soft knock on my door. Sarah stood there in the hallway, holding a flashlight and looking embarrassed. I'm sorry to bother you, Marcus, but my phone is dead, and I can't find my car keys anywhere. I think I might have locked myself out of my own house. She'd been at the grocery store when the storm hit, and in her rush to get inside before the worst of it, she'd somehow managed to lock her keys inside along with her purse. I'd invited her up to my apartment to wait out the storm, made her coffee on my camping stove, and we'd ended up talking until 3 in the morning. Really talking, not just the polite neighbor small talk we usually exchanged. She told me about her marriage, how it had slowly crumbled over the years as she and Harold grew in different directions. He wanted everything to stay exactly the same forever, while she dreamed of traveling, maybe going back to school, exploring parts of herself she'd put aside when they'd gotten married at 22. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I feel like I'm finally waking up after being asleep for 15 years, she'd said. Curled up in my reading chair with her hands wrapped around her coffee mug, Harold used to say I was going through a phase whenever I talked about wanting something different. Like wanting to grow as a person was just some silly whim I'd get over eventually. I'd wanted to tell her that growth wasn't a phase, that wanting more from life showed strength, not weakness. I'd wanted to say that any man who couldn't see how incredible she was didn't deserve her. Instead, I'd just listened, because sometimes that's what people need most. When the power came back on around dawn, she'd thanked me and hurried back to her house. But something had shifted between us that night. The careful distance she usually maintained had cracked, just a little. Now, as I carried box after box from her house to the moving truck, I could feel that same electricity in the air. Every time our hands accidentally touched, every time she smiled at something I said, every time she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear while concentrating on her packing list, I felt myself falling deeper into something I wasn't sure I understood, but couldn't seem to stop. The movers were efficient, but impersonal, treating Sarah's belongings like inventory to be relocated rather than pieces of someone's life being carefully transplanted. I found myself being extra gentle with the boxers marked fragile or personal, as if handling them with care could somehow protect her from the pain of starting over. Sarah noticed, of course. She noticed everything. You're being very careful with those, she said, as I loaded a box of her art supplies into the truck. Most people just toss boxes around like they're full of old newspapers. I shrugged, feeling suddenly self-conscious. They're important to you, so they're important to me. The words hung in the air between us, heavier than any box I'd carried. That day, Sarah stopped what she was doing and really looked at me, her green eyes searching my face for something I wasn't sure I was ready to reveal. For a moment, I thought she might say something, acknowledge the tension that had been building between us for months. Instead, she just smiled softly and handed me another box. You're sweet, Marcus, but you're too young to understand how complicated these things really are. There it was again, that gentle dismissal wrapped in what sounded almost like affection. But this time, instead of accepting it and changing the subject like I usually did, I felt something rebellious spark inside me. What if I'm not as young as you think? I asked, setting the box down in the truck with more force than necessary. What if age isn't just about how many years you've been alive, but about how much you've learned in those years. Sarah raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my pushback. What if understanding isn't something you automatically get when you turn a certain age, but something you earn by paying attention, by caring enough to really see people? She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her processing my words, trying to decide how to respond. Finally, she shook her head with a small smile. Marcus, you have no idea what you're talking about. When you've been through what I've been through, when you've made the mistakes I've made, then we can have this conversation. But I wasn't backing down this time, so teach me, I said, stepping closer to her, despite every rational voice in my head screaming at me to retreat. Stop assuming I can't handle the truth just because I haven't lived as long as you have. Stop protecting me from complications I never asked to be protected from. The moving truck suddenly felt very quiet around us, even with the sounds of the neighborhood continuing in the background. Sarah's expression shifted from amused dismissal to something more serious, more uncertain. Marcus, she said quietly, glancing around to make sure none of the movers were within earshot. This isn't a game. This isn't some romantic movie where the age difference doesn't matter and everything works out perfectly. This is real life, and real life is messy and complicated and full of consequences you can't predict. I know it's real life, I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. I'm living it too, Sarah, and maybe I haven't been divorced or had my heart broken the way you have. But that doesn't mean I don't understand pain. It doesn't mean I don't understand what it's like to want something you're afraid you can't have. Something flickered across her face then, a vulnerability she usually kept hidden. For just a moment, her carefully maintained composure slipped, and I saw the woman beneath all the protective walls she'd built. The woman who was scared and hopeful and tired of being strong all the time. The woman who maybe, just maybe, felt the same impossible pull toward me that I felt toward her. But the moment passed quickly, and she straightened her shoulders, rebuilding those walls right before my eyes. We should get back to work, she said, turning away from me to grab another box. These movers charge by the hour. I wanted to press the issue, to push past her defenses, and make her admit that there was something real happening between us. But I could see in the set of her shoulders and the careful way she avoided meeting my eyes that she'd already said more than she'd intended. So I picked up another box and followed her back to the truck, letting the moment slip away, even as every fiber of my being screamed in frustration. The rest of the afternoon passed in a kind of careful dance, both of us working hard to pretend that nothing had changed, while simultaneously being hyper-aware of every glance, every accidental touch, every loaded silence. The movers finished loading the truck around 5 o'clock. Sarah signed their paperwork with the kind of relieved exhaustion that comes at the end of a long, emotionally draining day. Thank you so much for your help today, Marcus, she said. As the truck pulled away from the curb, I couldn't have done this without you. Her voice was back to its usual warm but distant tone, as if our earlier conversation had never happened. But I could see something different in her eyes, a new awareness that hadn't been there before. It was nothing, I said, even though we both knew it wasn't true. Are you okay? About leaving the house, I mean? She looked back at the colonial that had been her home for 15 years, now empty and somehow smaller, without all her belongings filling it up. It's strange, she admitted. I've been planning this move for months, looking forward to having my own space, my own life. But now that it's actually happening, it feels more final than I expected. She paused, then added quietly, Harold came by yesterday to get the last of his things. He kept apologizing, as if saying sorry enough times could somehow undo 15 years of growing apart. I wanted to tell her that she deserved better than apologies from a man who'd thrown away something precious. Wanted to say that some people spend their whole lives looking for the kind of depth and intelligence and quiet strength she possessed naturally. Instead, I just nodded and said, his loss. Sarah smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes and made my chest tight with longing. You always know exactly what to say, don't you? She said, and there was something almost wistful in her voice. It's one of your many gifts. Before I could respond to that loaded comment, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister Emily. Dinner Sunday at Mom and Dad's. Don't you dare cancel again. We're worried about you becoming a hermit. I glanced at the message and sighed, suddenly feeling the weight of all the expectations and assumptions that surrounded my life outside of Maple Street. Everything okay? Sarah asked, noticing my expression. Just family stuff, I said, shoving my phone back into my pocket. They think I'm wasting my youth by living in the suburbs instead of partying in the city every weekend. Are you? She asked, and there was something vulnerable in the question, as if my answer mattered more than it should. I looked at her. Standing there in the fading afternoon light, her hair escaping from its ponytail, her sweater slightly rumpled from a day of heavy lifting, and I felt that familiar certainty settle in my chest. No, I said simply. I'm exactly where I want to be. The following Tuesday, I found myself standing in the produce section of Miller's Market, staring at a display of peaches and thinking about Sarah. 3 days had passed since the move, and I hadn't seen her once. Her house across the street sat empty now, windows dark, the for sale sign swaying gently in the evening breeze. I knew she'd moved to Riverside Apartments on the other side of town, but the distance felt like an ocean between us. My phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. My mother's name flashed on the screen, and I reluctantly answered. Marcus, honey, are you still coming to dinner Sunday? Emma's been asking about you, and your father wants to discuss that promotion opportunity at his firm. My parents meant well, but they had this way of planning my life that made me feel like I was still 12 years old. Yeah, Mom, I'll be there, I said, grabbing a bag of apples I didn't really need. Good. And Marcus, maybe this time you could bring someone. It's been months since you've introduced us to anyone you're dating. The assumption stung more than it should have. They thought I was just going through some antisocial phase, hiding away in suburbia because I was afraid to put myself out there. If only they knew the truth. If only they understood that I'd found something worth waiting for. Something worth fighting for, even if the woman I'd fallen for insisted on treating me like a well-meaning child. After hanging up, I wandered through the rest of my grocery shopping in a daze, my mind replaying every conversation Sarah and I had shared over the past few months. The parking lot was nearly empty when I finally made it back to my car, arms full of groceries I probably didn't need. As I was loading bags into my trunk, I heard a familiar voice behind me. Marcus, is that really you? I turned around and nearly dropped my groceries. Sarah stood about 10 feet away, pushing a shopping cart and looking genuinely surprised. To see me, she was wearing a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked different somehow, more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. Maybe it was the freedom of her new apartment, or maybe it was just good lighting, but something about her seemed to glow from within. Sarah, hi, I managed, probably grinning like an idiot. How are you settling in? How's the new place? She smiled, and I felt that familiar flutter in my chest. It's wonderful, actually. Wonder than the house, but it feels like home already. I never realized how much space I didn't need until I didn't have it anymore. We stood there for a moment, neither of us quite sure what to say next. The parking lot suddenly felt very public and very exposed, like we were performing our careful friendship for an invisible audience. I was just thinking, Sarah said, then stopped herself. Actually, never mind. Silly. What? I pressed, stepping closer despite myself. Come on, you can't start a sentence like that and not finish. She laughed, that wind chime sound that made my heart skip. I was going to ask if you wanted to come see the apartment. I've been unpacking all week, and I could use an objective opinion on my furniture arrangement. But then I realized how that might sound, and I don't want to give you the wrong idea. The wrong idea. There it was again, that careful distance. She maintained, as if acknowledging our connection might somehow make it dangerous. What if it's exactly the right idea? I asked before I could stop myself. What if I want to see your apartment, not because you need help with furniture, but because I miss talking to you? Sarah's expression shifted, and I saw her struggling with something internal. We can't keep doing this. We can't keep pretending that there isn't something happening here, and we can't keep ignoring it either. It's not fair to either of us. Then what do you suggest? Because I'm tired of pretending I don't feel what I feel. I'm tired of acting like age is some insurmountable barrier when everything else between us feels so right. Follow me to my apartment. We need to have a real conversation about this, one way or another. But I need you to understand that this isn't me giving in to something. This is me trying to be honest with both of us about why it can't work. Coffee, I just got a new machine, and I'm still figuring out how to use it. You've really made this place home already. It feels like you, if that makes sense. It does make sense. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living somewhere that's actually mine. Harold always had such strong opinions about how things should look, how they should be arranged. I forgot I had my own taste until I didn't have to consider his anymore. I need to tell you something, and I need you to really listen to what I'm saying, okay? I care about you. More than I should? More than is probably wise? You're kind and intelligent and funny, and you see the world in a way that makes me remember what it felt like to be optimistic about the future. But caring about someone isn't always enough. Sometimes caring about someone means protecting them from making a mistake that could hurt them later. What mistake? What exactly do you think would happen if we tried to see where this goes? You think you know what you want right now, but you're at a completely different stage of life than I am. You should be dating women your own age, women who want the same things you want. Marriage, kids, building a life together from the ground up. Who says that's what I want? When did I ever tell you I was looking for someone to have kids with immediately? It's not about what you think you want right now. It's about what you'll want 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I'm 52 years old. I wanted more children. That ship has sailed. If I wanted to get married again and play house and pretend I'm 25, I missed that chance. I'm not asking you to pretend to be 25. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are, because exactly who you are is someone I'm falling in love with. You don't love me. You love the idea of me. You love the fantasy of the sophisticated older woman who's going to teach you about life and love and passion. But I'm not a fantasy. I'm a real person with real baggage and real fears, and I'm too old to be someone's learning experience. Don't you dare tell me what I feel. Don't diminish my feelings by calling them a fantasy just because they're inconvenient for you. I know exactly who you are. I know you're scared and tired and starting over after 15 years of marriage. I know you have baggage and fears and days when you wonder if you're making the right choices. I know you hum when you're happy and that you worry about your art students more than you probably should. I know you read mystery novels when you can't sleep and that you make the best vegetable soup I've ever tasted. I know you're stronger than you think you are and more beautiful than you realize. I know all of this because I pay attention. Not because you're some exotic older woman I'm trying to collect like a trophy, but because you matter to me. Because when I talk to you, I feel like I'm talking to someone who actually sees me, not just the version of me that everyone else wants. Me to be, you scare me. You scare me because you make me want things I thought I'd given up on. You make me feel like maybe it's not too late to have something real, something honest and passionate and alive. So why is that a bad thing? Why are you so determined to protect both of us from the possibility of being happy? Because I've been through this before in a different way. I've been the young woman who thought love could conquer everything, who believed that feelings were enough to overcome any obstacle. And I learned the hard way that sometimes love isn't enough. This isn't the same situation. Harold left you for someone else. That's not about age or compatibility or any of the things you're worried about with us. That's about him being an idiot who didn't appreciate what he had. You're so sure of yourself, aren't you? So confident that you know what you want and that what you want is me? I am sure. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. But I'm not asking you to be sure. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, what we have is worth exploring. What would people say? What would your family think? Your parents probably have very specific ideas about who you should end up with, and I guarantee I'm not it. My family wants me to be happy. They might not understand it at first, but if they see that you make me happy, really happy, they'll come around. And if they don't, that's their problem, not ours. You make it sound so simple, like we could just decide to be together and everything else would fall into place. Maybe it could. Maybe we're overthinking this. Maybe instead of imagining all the ways it could go wrong, we should focus on all the ways it could go right. If we did this, if we decided to see where this goes, it would have to be real. No games, no pretending it's casual when it's not. I'm too old for casual. I don't have time to waste on something that isn't going anywhere. I don't want casual either. I want real. I want honest. I want to wake up in the morning and know that I'm building something meaningful with someone who challenges me and supports me and makes me want to be better than I am. Even if that someone is 24 years older than you, especially then, because those 24 years have turned you into someone incredible, someone worth waiting for, someone worth fighting for. Okay, let's try. But Marcus, I need you to promise me something. If you wake up 6 months from now and realize this isn't what you thought it would be, if you decide you want someone your own age after all, you have to tell me. Don't try to. Spare my feelings or let it drag on. I'd rather have my heart broken honestly than be protected by lies. I promise, I said, cupping her face in my hands. But I need you to promise me something too. Promise me you'll stop waiting for this. To fail, promise me you'll give us a real chance instead of looking for reasons why it won't work. She leaned into my touch, closing her eyes. I promise to try. That's the best I can do right now. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. I leaned forward and kissed her softly, tasting coffee and possibility and the beginning of something that felt like coming home. When we broke apart, Sarah rested her forehead against mine and smiled. So what happens now? She asked. Now we figure it out together, I said, threading my fingers through her hair. We take it one day at a time and see what we can build. As the sun set outside her apartment windows, painting the room in shades of gold and pink, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because Sarah was older or sophisticated or different from other women I'd known, but because she was Sarah. Because she saw me and challenged me and made me feel like the best version of myself. Whatever came next, whatever obstacles we'd have to face, we'd face them together. And for the first time since I'd moved to Maple Street, I felt truly optimistic about the future. 2 weeks after our conversation in Sarah's apartment, I found myself standing in front of my parents' house, on Elm Street in Hartford, holding a bouquet of flowers and trying to work up the courage to walk through the front door. Sunday family dinner had always been a tradition in the Richardson household, but this time felt different. This time, I wasn't coming alone. Sarah sat in my passenger seat, smoothing down her navy blue dress and checking her reflection in the side mirror for the third time in 5 minutes. She'd agreed to meet my parents, but I could see the nervous energy radiating from her like heat waves off summer pavement. "Are you sure about this, Marcus?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "Maybe we should have waited a few more weeks, gotten more comfortable with whatever this is between us before involving family." I reached over and took her hand, marveling at how natural the gesture had become over the past 2 weeks. Been taking things slowly, spending evenings at her apartment talking about everything and nothing, sharing meals and quiet moments that felt both new and familiar. Each day that passed made me more certain that what I felt for Sarah wasn't some temporary infatuation or rebellion against expectations. It was real, solid, and growing stronger. "My family is going to love you," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "And even if they don't understand it at first, they'll see how happy you make me." Sarah squeezed my hand but didn't look convinced. "Marcus, I'm closer in age to your parents than I am to you. Your mother is probably going to take one look at me and think I'm some predatory older woman taking advantage of her baby boy." The thought had occurred to me too, if I was being honest. My mother had very specific ideas about appropriate relationships, and a 24-year age gap definitely didn't fit into her vision of my future. But I'd learned something important over the past few months. Living your life according to other people's expectations was a guaranteed path to misery. "Let me worry about my mother," I said, getting out of the car and walking around to open Sarah's door. "Today is about them getting to know you, not about defending our relationship." To a jury, she accepted my offered hand and stood up, straightening her shoulders in a way that reminded me she'd been handling difficult situations long before I came along. The front door opened before we could even ring the bell, and my sister Emma appeared. In the doorway, wearing a curious expression in a bright yellow sundress. She was 2 years older than me, worked as a marketing director for a tech company in Boston, and had never been shy about sharing her opinions on my life choices. "Well," she said, looking between Sarah and me with raised eyebrows. "So?" "This is why you've been hiding out in suburbia for months. Mom, Dad, you need to come see this." I felt Sarah tense beside me, and I gave her hand what I hoped was a reassuring squeeze. Emma had a talent for making dramatic situations even more dramatic, but she wasn't mean-spirited, just direct. My parents appeared behind Emma, my father still wearing his reading glasses and my mother wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. The tableau we presented must have been quite a sight, their youngest son standing hand in hand with a woman who was clearly much older than anyone they'd expected to meet. "Mom, Dad, Emma," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and confident, "I'd like you to meet Sarah Martinez. Sarah, these are my parents, David and Carol Richardson, and my sister Emma." Sarah stepped forward with the kind of poise that comes from years of handling awkward parent-teacher conferences and school board meetings. "It's so nice to meet you all," she said, her voice warm and genuine. "Marcus has told me so many wonderful things about you. Thank you for welcoming me into your home." My mother recovered first, her ingrained politeness overriding whatever shock she might have been feeling. "Of course, dear. Please, come in. We're just about to sit down for dinner." The dining room felt smaller than usual with the weight of unspoken questions hanging in the air. My father had opened a bottle of wine, and we all busied ourselves with the familiar rituals of passing dishes and filling glasses. Sarah complimented my mother on the roast chicken and asked thoughtful questions about my father's work as an accountant. She was charming without being overwhelming, intelligent without being intimidating. But I could see my family processing, trying to figure out how this composed, mature woman fit into their understanding of who I was and what I wanted. Emma, never one to let tension simmer when she could address it head-on, was the first to broach the subject directly. "So Sarah," she said, taking a sip of wine, "Marcus mentioned you're an art teacher. How long have you been doing that?" It seemed like an innocent question, but I knew my sister well enough to recognize the calculation behind it. She was trying to piece together Sarah's timeline, figure out her age without asking directly. 15 years, Sarah replied easily. "I started teaching right out of college, then took a few years off when I got married, then went back when I realized I missed it too much to stay away." My mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Oh, you were married before?" The question carried more weight than mere curiosity, and I saw Sarah recognize the deeper inquiry. Yes. My divorce was finalized about 4 months ago. Sarah's voice remained steady, but I could see the slight tension in her shoulders. It was a long marriage that ran its course. Sometimes people grow in different directions, and the kindest thing you can do is acknowledge that and part ways amicably. My father nodded thoughtfully. "That takes a lot of maturity and wisdom. Many couples try to force something that isn't working anymore and end up causing more pain than necessary." There was approval in his voice, and I felt some of the tension in my chest ease. My father had always been the more pragmatic of my parents, less concerned with appearances and more interested in character. "What kind of art do you teach?" my mother asked, and I could hear her making an effort to find common ground. "I've always admired people who can create beautiful things. I can barely draw a stick figure." Sarah smiled, and for the first time since we'd arrived, it reached her eyes. "I teach everything from basic drawing to advanced painting and sculpture. But my favorite part is watching students discover they can express things through art that they can't put into words. There's something magical about that moment when someone realizes they have something important to say and the tools to say it." The conversation flowed more easily after that, moving from art to travel, to books, to current events. Sarah held her own in every topic, contributing insights that showed both intelligence and experience without ever talking down to anyone. I watched my family slowly warming to her, seeing past their initial surprise to recognize the qualities that had drawn me to her in the first place. It was Emma who finally addressed the elephant in the room. Apropos of nothing and right in the middle of a discussion about vacation destinations. "Can I ask how old you are, Sarah? I'm trying to do the math in my head and it's driving me crazy." The directness of the question made everyone freeze, But Sarah handled it with the same grace she'd shown all evening. "I'm 52, she said simply. "I know that probably seems old to you, and I understand if it raises concerns." The silence that followed felt heavy with calculation and judgment, and I realized this was the moment that would determine whether my family could accept what Sarah and I were building together. My mother was the first to speak, her voice carefully neutral. "That is quite an age difference." There was no hostility in her tone, but there was concern, the kind of worry that comes from a place of love rather than judgment. "Marcus is 28. Dawned. You've lived nearly twice as long as he has." "I'm aware of that," Sarah replied quietly. "Believe me, the age difference is something I've thought about extensively. It's not something either of us entered into lightly. I felt the need to jump in, to defend our relationship and explain all the ways that age was just a number. But something in Sarah's expression stopped me. This was her moment to speak for herself. "I spent 15 years in a marriage where I felt like I was sleepwalking through my own life," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I compromised so much of who I was in the name of keeping the peace that I almost forgot who I was underneath all those compromises. When I met Marcus, he saw me. Not the version of me that was trying to be what someone else wanted, but the real me. The me that has dreams and opinions and passion." She paused, looking around the table at each of my family members. "I know what you're thinking. You're wondering what a woman my age could possibly want with someone Marcus's age. You're worried that I'm taking advantage of him somehow, or that this is some kind of midlife crisis that's going to end badly for everyone involved." Emma leaned forward, clearly engaged, despite her initial skepticism. "Those thoughts did cross my mind, yes. Not because I think you're a bad person, but because, well, it's unusual. And when something is unusual, people worry." Sarah nodded, acknowledging the honesty. "I understand that. But I need you to know that I'm not looking for someone to fix my problems or make me feel young again. I'm not trying to recapture my lost youth or live vicariously through someone else's energy." "What are you looking for then?" my father asked, his tone genuinely curious rather than confrontational. Sarah glanced at me, and I saw something vulnerable and hopeful in her expression. "I'm looking for partnership, real partnership, with someone who challenges me to be better while accepting who I am right now. I'm looking for someone who makes me laugh and thinks my opinions are worth hearing and doesn't try to change the fundamental parts of my personality. I spent so many years being told I was too intense, too opinionated, too ambitious for my own good. Marcus doesn't see those things as flaws to be corrected, sees them as strengths to be celebrated. And yes, he's younger than me, but he's not immature. He's not looking for a mother figure or someone to take care of him. He's looking for an equal partner just like I am." The room fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt thoughtful rather than tense. I could see my parents processing Sarah's words, trying to reconcile their preconceptions with the reality of the woman sitting at their table. My mother was the next to speak, her voice softer than it had been all evening. "Marcus has always been mature for his age," she said slowly. "Even as a child, he seemed to see things differently than other kids his age. More seriously, more deeply." She looked at me with a mixture of pride and concern. "But Sarah, you have to understand our position. We want him to be happy, but we also don't want him to limit his options before he's really had a chance to explore what's out there." "What if what's out there isn't what he wants?" Sarah asked gently. "What if what makes him happy doesn't fit the timeline or the expectations that everyone else has for him?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been grappling with myself over the past few months. Society had very clear expectations about what someone my age should be doing, dating around, focusing on career advancement, maybe settling down with someone appropriate in a few years and starting a family. But those expectations had never felt quite right to me. Even before I met Sarah, I'd dated women my own age and felt like I was going through the motions, checking boxes rather than building genuine connections. The relationships had been pleasant, but ultimately hollow, lacking the depth and intellectual stimulation I craved. "I think," my father said carefully, "that happiness is more important than following a prescribed timeline. Marcus is an adult, capable of making his own decisions about his life. And Sarah, From what I can see tonight, you're a thoughtful, intelligent woman who clearly cares about his well-being." He paused, then added with a small smile, though I have to admit, this isn't exactly what we pictured when we imagined meeting. "Marcus's girlfriend." Emma laughed at that, breaking some of the remaining tension. "Dad, when has Marcus ever done anything the way we expected? Remember when he decided to major in engineering instead of business? Or when he chose to live in suburban Connecticut instead of getting a trendy apartment in Manhattan? He's always marched to his own drummer." "That's true," my mother said, and I could see her starting to relax. "I suppose we should have known that when he finally brought someone home, it wouldn't be the elementary school teacher or young professional we'd been imagining." The comment stung a little, but I understood where it was coming from. My parents had spent years picturing my future based on conventional expectations, and it was going to take time for them to adjust to a different reality. "I know this isn't what you planned for him," Sarah said, her voice kind but firm. "But I hope you can see that what we have is real and meaningful and worth protecting. I'm not asking you to approve or understand completely. I'm just asking you to trust Marcus's judgment and give us a chance to show you that love doesn't always follow the rules." The dinner wound down after that, the conversation shifting to lighter topics as we all navigated the new dynamic. When it was time to leave, my parents hugged Sarah goodbye, and my mother whispered something in her ear that made her smile. Emma walked us to the car, her expression thoughtful. "She's not what I expected," she said once we were out of earshot. "Of the house, I thought she'd be more, predatory, desperate. But she seems really genuine, and she clearly adores you." She looked at me seriously. "Just promise me you're thinking with your head as well as your heart. I know you think you're mature for your age, but there's a difference between being mature and having life experience." "I promise I'm being careful," I said, meaning it. "But Emma, I've never felt anything like this before. She doesn't make me feel young or naive. She makes me feel like the best version of myself." Emma nodded. "Slowly, I can see that. And for what it's worth, I think Mom and Dad will come around. They're just worried because they love you." As we drove back to Sarah's apartment, I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The evening had gone better than I dared to hope, but I could see that Sarah was still processing everything that had been said. "That wasn't so bad," I said, trying to gauge her mood. "I think they really liked you." Sarah was quiet for a moment, staring out the passenger window at the darkening sky. "Your family loves you very much," she said finally. "They're good people who want what's best for you. I can't fault them for worrying." There was something in her tone that made me glance over at her, something that sounded almost like doubt. "But," I prompted, sensing there was more she wasn't saying. She sighed and turned to face me. "But I keep wondering if they're right to worry. If maybe I am being selfish by letting this relationship continue when I know it's going to be complicated. For you," the familiar refrain made my chest tighten with frustration. "Sarah, we've been through this. You're not being selfish, and I'm not some naive kid who doesn't understand the consequences of my choices." I pulled into her apartment complex and parked, turning to face her fully. "Did something my family said tonight change how you feel about us?" "No," she said quickly. "Nothing they said was wrong or unfair. They're worried about you, which is exactly what loving parents should do. But it made me realize that this isn't just about us anymore. Our relationship affects other people, people who matter to you." I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached for her hands. "Of course, it affects other people. Every relationship does. But that doesn't mean we should let other people's concerns dictate our choices." I squeezed her hands gently. "Sarah, my family will adjust. They might need time, but they'll see what I see in you. And even if they don't, that doesn't change how I feel." She smiled at that, but I could still see uncertainty in her eyes. "I just don't want to be the reason you become estranged from your family. I don't want to be the choice you have to make between love and everything else that matters to you." The vulnerability in her voice broke my heart. Here was this strong, accomplished woman worrying that she wasn't worth the complications she might bring to my life. "You're not a choice I have to make," I said firmly. "You're the choice I want to make. Every day, for as long as you'll let me." I leaned over and kissed her softly, tasting the wine we'd shared at dinner and the promise of all the conversations still to come. When we broke apart, Sarah rested her forehead against mine and closed her eyes. "I love you, Marcus," she whispered, and my heart soared at hearing the words I'd been hoping for. "I love you too, Sarah." More than I thought it was possible to love someone. As we sat there in the gathering darkness, holding each other in the front seat of my car, I felt like we'd crossed some important threshold. Meeting my family had been a test of sorts, and while we hadn't received their unqualified blessing, we'd proven that what we had was strong enough to withstand scrutiny. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together, and that was enough to make any obstacles seem conquerable. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our new home, watching Sarah through the window as she painted in the converted garage that had become her art studio. The morning light streamed through the large windows I'd installed last month, illuminating her face as she worked on a canvas that seemed to glow with life and color. We'd found this place together. A small house on the outskirts of town with enough space for both of us to pursue our passions without stepping on each other's dreams. The past half year had been a journey of discovery, not just about each other, but about what it meant to build a life with someone who challenged every assumption I'd ever made about love and partnership. Sarah had been right about one thing. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, external pressures, and internal struggles that tested our commitment in ways I hadn't anticipated. But there had also been mornings like this one, when I woke up next to someone who made me want to be better than I was yesterday, who pushed me to think deeper and love harder and approach life with the kind of intentionality that comes from knowing how precious and fragile happiness can be. Sarah had taught me that maturity wasn't about age or experience. It was about choosing growth over comfort, courage over convenience, and love over fear. My phone buzzed on the counter, pulling me from my thoughts. A text from my coworker Jake at the engineering firm. "Happy birthday, man. Big 29. Are you having a party, or are you and your lady friend doing something quiet?" It was strange how different my life looked now compared to where I'd been a year ago. Jake and most of my colleagues had eventually met Sarah at company events, and while there had been some initial awkwardness and whispered conversations, most people had adjusted to seeing us together. The real test had come 3 months ago when Sarah's ex-husband Harold had shown up at her school during parent-teacher conferences, demanding to know why she was flaunting her boy toy around town. Word had gotten back to me through the school's grapevine. It had driven straight to Riverside High, my blood boiling with protective anger. I'd found Sarah in her classroom after hours, calmly grading papers as if nothing had happened. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held her pen a little too tightly, the slight tremor in her hands that betrayed her composure. "Are you okay?" I'd asked, sitting down in one of the student desks that was far too small for my frame. She'd looked up from her papers and smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Harold is having a difficult time accepting that I've moved on. He seems to think that if he can make enough people uncomfortable with our relationship, I'll come to my senses and realize what a mistake I'm making." The casual way she said it had infuriated me more than if she'd been crying or angry. "What did you tell him?" I'd asked, fighting to keep my voice level. Sarah had set down her pen and really looked at me then, her green eyes searching my face for something. I told him that my personal life was no longer his concern, and that if he had issues with my teaching or my professional conduct, he was welcome to speak with the principal. But if he wanted to discuss my relationship choices, he'd picked the wrong person and the wrong venue. The pride I'd felt in that moment had been overwhelming. Here was this woman facing criticism and judgment from someone who was supposed to have loved her, and she'd stood her ground with grace and dignity. She hadn't hidden our relationship or apologized for her choices. She'd simply refused to engage with the drama and maintained her boundaries like the strong, self-possessed woman she was. But I'd also seen the cost of that strength. At night, curled up together on her couch, she'd finally let her guard down. "Sometimes I wonder if Harold is right," she'd whispered against my chest. "Not about you being wrong for me, but about whether I'm being selfish by putting you in this position, making you deal with gossip and judgment and people questioning your choices." I'd tilted her chin up so she was looking at me directly. "Sarah, every relationship comes with challenges. Some couples have to deal with long distance or financial stress or family drama. We have to deal with people who think they know what's best for us better than we do. But that's their problem, not ours. I'd rather face judgment with you than be perfectly accepted with someone who doesn't understand me. That conversation had marked a turning point for us. We'd stopped trying to minimize our relationship or make it more palatable for other people. We'd started holding hands in public, going to movies and restaurants as a couple, attending work events together. And slowly, gradually, the whispers had died down as people realized we weren't going anywhere. My family had been on their own journey of acceptance. My mother had started calling Sarah directly instead of going through me, asking for advice about art classes she was considering taking. My father had begun including her in conversations about current events and politics, clearly valuing her perspective. Emma had become one of Sarah's biggest champions, often defending our relationship to friends who made thoughtless comments about age differences. The breakthrough had come during Christmas dinner, when my grandmother had made a pointed comment about robbing the cradle while passing the mashed potatoes. Before I could respond, my mother had set down her fork and looked directly at her own mother. Mom, Marcus is happier than I've seen him in years. Sarah treats him with respect and love, and she makes him laugh. If you can't see past their ages to recognize a good relationship when it's right in front of you, that's your loss, not theirs. The silence that had followed had been deafening, but it had also been definitive. My family had officially chosen our side, and while it had taken months of gradual warming, they'd finally seen what I'd known from the beginning, that Sarah and I were partners in the truest sense of the word. Now, as I watched her through the window, I thought about how much we'd both grown over the past 6 months. Sarah had started taking evening classes in art therapy, inspired by her work with struggling students and her own journey of rediscovering herself after divorce. She'd been accepted into a graduate program that would allow her to combine her teaching background with counseling training, opening up new possibilities for her career. I'd been promoted to senior engineer at my firm, partly due to the confidence boost that came from being with someone who believed in my capabilities. Sarah had encouraged me to speak up in meetings, to share my ideas more freely, to stop second-guessing myself into mediocrity. She'd helped me see that being young didn't mean my perspectives were less valuable. It meant I brought fresh energy and new approaches to old problems. We'd also learned to navigate the practical challenges of our age difference. Sarah had been through a divorce and understood legal and financial complexities that were still foreign to me. I'd grown up with technology and social media in ways that sometimes mystified her. Instead of seeing these gaps as problems, we'd turned them into opportunities to teach each other. I'd helped Sarah set up social media accounts to promote her art and connect with other teachers. She'd taught me about budgeting for long-term goals and the importance of building credit responsibly. I'd introduced her to podcasts and streaming services that had opened up new worlds of entertainment. She'd shown me how to cook meals that were both nutritious and delicious, transforming my diet from takeout and frozen dinners to actual home-cooked food. But the most important thing we'd learned was how to be ourselves completely, while still being part of a couple. Sarah hadn't tried to make me older or more sophisticated than I was. I hadn't tried to make her younger or more carefree. We'd simply accepted each other as we were and found ways to blend our different perspectives into something stronger than either of us could be alone. The sound of the front door opening pulled me from my reflection. Sarah appeared in the kitchen. Doorway, her hands stained with paint and her hair pulled back in a messy bun that had somehow become my favorite look on her. "Good morning, birthday boy," she said, walking over to wrap her arms around my waist. "How does 29 feel so far?" "Pretty much the same as 28, I said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Though I have to say, the view from this kitchen is significantly better than the one from my old apartment." She laughed and squeezed me tighter. "That's because you're looking at actual art instead of Mr. Peterson's garbage cans." We'd moved in together 2 months ago, after spending weeks looking at houses and apartments, trying to find something that felt like home for both of us. This place had been perfect from the moment we'd walked through the door, big enough for privacy, but cozy enough for intimacy. With space for Sarah's art and my woodworking hobby, located in a neighborhood that was friendly but not nosy. "I have something for you," Sarah said, pulling back to look at me with excitement in her eyes. "It's not quite ready, but I wanted to show you what I've been working on." She took my hand and led me out to the garage studio, where an easel was set up with a canvas covered by a cloth. "Close your eyes," she instructed, and I complied, feeling a flutter of anticipation in my chest. I heard the rustle of fabric being moved, then Sarah's voice, softer now and slightly nervous. "Okay, you can look." I opened my eyes and felt my breath catch in my throat. The painting was a portrait of me, but not the way I'd ever seen myself. In Sarah's vision, I was standing in our garden, my hands dirty from planting, my face lit up with genuine joy. What struck me wasn't the technical skill of the work, though that was impressive. It was the way she'd captured something essential about who I was when I was happiest. "Sarah," I breathed, stepping closer to examine the details. "This is incredible. Is this really how you see me?" She moved to stand beside me, her shoulder brushing against my arm. "This is exactly how I see you. Happy, grounded, completely. Comfortable in your own skin. You have this way of approaching everything with such genuine enthusiasm. Like you're constantly discovering new things to love about the world." I stared at the painting for a long moment, seeing myself through her eyes. The man in the portrait looked confident and content, someone who knew what he wanted and wasn't afraid to pursue it. It was the version of myself I'd always hoped to become, and somehow Sarah had seen it in me before I'd even known it was there. "I love it," I said, turning to face her. "I love that you see me this way. More than that, I love that being with you has helped me become this person." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she reached up to cup my face in her paint-stained hands. "You were always this person, Marcus. So I just helped you see it." The moment was interrupted by the sound of cars pulling into our driveway. Through the garage window, I could see my parents' car followed by Emma's silver sedan. "Did you plan a surprise party?" I asked, suddenly aware that I was still in pajama pants and a t-shirt. Sarah grinned, looking pleased with herself. "Just a small gathering. Your family, a few friends from work, and Mrs. Patterson from next door, because she's been dying to see the inside of the house." The next few hours passed in a blur of conversation, laughter, and the kind of easy celebration that happens when people who care about each other come together without any agenda other than enjoying each other's company. My mother brought her famous chocolate cake. My father entertained everyone with stories from his accounting days. Emma appointed herself official photographer, documenting everything with her phone. But what struck me most was how naturally Sarah fit into the group. She wasn't trying to prove anything or win anyone over. She was just herself, warm, intelligent, funny, and completely at ease with who she was and what she brought to the gathering. My friends from work gravitated toward her, drawn by her ability to ask interesting questions and really listen to the answers. Mrs. Patterson was 78 and had strong opinions about everything, spent 20 minutes discussing gardening techniques with Sarah, and declared her a sensible young woman with excellent taste in flowers. The irony of Sarah being called a young woman by someone who was only 26 years older than her wasn't lost on me. But it also highlighted something important. Age really was just a number when it came to connecting with people. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself standing in our living room, watching Sarah laugh at something Emma was telling her while my father nodded approvingly at their conversation. This was my life now, not the life I'd planned or the one anyone had expected for me, but the life I'd chosen and fought for and built with someone who challenged me to be better every single day. My mother appeared beside me, following my gaze to where Sarah was animatedly describing her graduate program to a group of interested listeners. "She's good for you," my mother said quietly. I wasn't sure at first, I'll admit, the age difference. The timing of her divorce, all of it seemed potentially complicated. But watching you two together, seeing how you've grown over the past few months, I can't argue with the results. "She makes me want to be worthy of her," I said, surprising myself with the honesty of the admission. Every day, I wake up thinking about how I can be a better partner, a better man, someone who deserves the kind of love she's offering. My mother smiled and patted my arm. "That's exactly how it should be, honey. When you find the right person, they don't just accept who you are, they inspire you to become who you're meant to be." As the sun began to set, our guests started to leave, hugging goodbye and promising to get together again soon. My parents were the last to go, my mother pressing leftover cake into containers for us while my father gave Sarah a hug that lasted just a beat longer than politeness required. "Take care of him," he said to her, loud enough for me to hear, "and don't let him get too comfortable. He's got a tendency to settle for good enough when he should be reaching for great." Sarah smiled and squeezed his hand. "He's already reaching for great, Mr. Richardson. I'm just trying to keep up." After everyone was gone, Sarah and I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but happy. The house felt different now, more like ours, blessed by the presence of people who mattered to us and approved of what we were building together. "Best birthday ever," I said, pulling her close to me. "Thank you for organizing all of that. Thank you for being brave enough to introduce me to everyone," she replied, resting her head on my shoulder. "A year ago, I never would have imagined being part of something like this, being included in your family, having your friends accept me, feeling like I belong somewhere again." The vulnerability in her voice reminded me of how much courage it had taken for both of us to get to this point. "You do belong," I said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You belong here, with me, in this life we're creating together. Age difference, family concerns, social expectations, none of that matters compared to what we have." Sarah tilted her head up to look at me, her green eyes serious and bright. "I love you, Marcus Richardson. I love your optimism and your determination and the way you see possibility where other people see problems. I love that you chose me even when it would have been easier to choose someone else." "I love you too, Sarah Martinez," I said, cupping her face in my hands. "I love your strength and your wisdom and the way you've taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone worth growing with." As we sat there in our living room, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and love well chosen, I realized that we'd proven something important. We'd proven that love doesn't follow rules or timelines or other people's expectations. We'd proven that the best relationships aren't necessarily the easiest ones, but the ones where both people are committed to becoming better versions of themselves. We'd proven that age is less important than emotional maturity, that experience matters less than openness to new experiences, and that sometimes the most unconventional choices lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. Most importantly, we'd proven that when you find someone who sees the best in you and inspires you to reach for it, you hold on tight and never let go. Because that kind of love, the kind that challenges you and changes you and makes you grateful, to be alive doesn't come around often. So when it does, it's worth fighting for, no matter what anyone else thinks. As the last light of my 29th birthday faded outside our windows, I felt more certain than ever that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, with exactly the person I was meant to love. The future stretched out ahead of us, full of possibility and promise, and I couldn't wait to see what we'd build together next. 2 years had passed since that birthday celebration, and I was standing in the auditorium of Riverside High School, watching Sarah receive the Teacher of the Year award from the superintendent. The pride swelling in my chest felt almost overwhelming. As I listened to the speech describing her innovative art therapy program and its impact on at-risk students, she'd completed her graduate degree the previous spring, balancing coursework with full-time teaching and somehow managing to revolutionize how the school district approached student mental health. The woman on stage bore little resemblance to the uncertain divorcee I'd first met helping with moving boxes. This Sarah stood tall and confident, speaking passionately about the power of creative expression to heal trauma and build resilience. She'd found her calling in combining art with counseling, and watching her transform struggling teenagers through paint and clay and honest conversation had been one of the most inspiring experiences of my life. As the applause died down and Sarah made her way back to her seat, she caught my eye in the audience and smiled. That smile still had the power to make my heart skip, but now it carried the weight of shared dreams achieved and challenges overcome together. We'd learned so much about each other over the past 2 years, discovered strengths we didn't know we possessed, and weathered storms that had only made us stronger. The biggest test had come 18 months ago when my engineering firm had offered me a promotion that would require relocating to their headquarters in Seattle. It was exactly the kind of career advancement opportunity my father had always envisioned for me, complete with a significant salary increase and the chance to work on cutting-edge sustainable energy projects. The old Marcus might have taken it without hesitation, prioritizing professional achievement over personal considerations. But I wasn't the old Marcus anymore. I was someone who understood that success meant more than climbing corporate ladders, that the best opportunities weren't always the most obvious ones, and that some things were worth more than money or prestige. After a week of agonizing over the decision, I'd turned down the promotion and instead proposed a consulting arrangement that would allow me to work on select projects. Remotely, while maintaining my base in Connecticut, my parents had been bewildered by the choice. "This is the chance of a lifetime," my mother had argued during one of our increasingly tense phone conversations. "You could be running your own department by the time you're 35. Sarah will understand. She's been through a career change herself." But Sarah had never asked me to sacrifice my ambitions for our relationship. In fact, she'd encouraged me to seriously consider the Seattle offer, even going so far as to research art therapy programs on the West Coast in case we decided to relocate together. It was her willingness to disrupt her own newly stable life for my benefit that had ultimately convinced me the promotion wasn't worth it. I don't want a career that requires me to choose between professional success and personal happiness. I'd told my parents, I want both, and I'm willing to create my own path to get there. The consulting arrangement had worked out better than anyone had expected. I was earning nearly as much as the Seattle position would have paid, working on projects that genuinely excited me, and had the flexibility to support Sarah's career while building my own. Now, as the awards ceremony concluded and people began filing out of the auditorium, I made my way toward the stage where Sarah was accepting congratulations. From colleagues and students, a group of her art therapy participants had made her a banner that read, "Ms. Martinez changed our lives." And I watched her tear up as they explained how her program had helped them process everything from family divorce to anxiety disorders. "There's someone I want you all to meet," Sarah said as I approached. "This is Marcus Richardson, my partner. He's been my biggest supporter throughout this whole journey." The teenagers looked at me with curious eyes, probably trying to figure out the dynamics of our relationship just like everyone else had done over the years. "Ms. Martinez talks about you all the time," said a girl with purple hair and paint-stained fingers. "She says you help her practice her presentations and give her ideas for new projects." I glanced at Sarah, surprised. She'd never mentioned discussing me with her students. "Marcus has this way of asking questions that make me think about things differently," Sarah explained, looking slightly embarrassed by the attention. "He's been invaluable in helping me develop the theoretical framework for the program." It was true that we'd spent countless evenings at our kitchen table, me helping her work through research papers and grant applications while she painted or sketched ideas for new therapeutic interventions. But what struck me most about the interaction wasn't the students' acceptance of our relationship or even their obvious affection for Sarah. It was the realization that we'd become a team in ways I'd never anticipated. We weren't just two people who'd fallen in love despite an age difference. We were partners who challenged each other professionally, supported each other's growth, and found ways to make our different strengths complement rather than compete. The drive home was quiet, both of us processing the emotions of the evening. Sarah stared out the passenger window at the familiar streets of our neighborhood, the award certificate resting in her lap. "I keep thinking about where I was 3 years ago," she said finally. "Divorced, starting over, convinced that my best years were behind me. I never imagined I'd be here." "Where exactly is here?" I asked, pulling into our driveway. She turned to look at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Here is having work that matters, a relationship that challenges me to grow, and a sense of purpose I'd given up on finding. Here is feeling like I'm living my actual life instead of some compromised version of it." We sat in the car for a moment, neither of us eager to break the spell of the evening. Finally, Sarah reached over and took my hand. "Marcus, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me." The seriousness in her tone made my stomach clench with sudden anxiety. "What is it?" "When we first got together, I spent so much time worrying about whether I was holding you back, whether you'd eventually regret choosing me over someone more adjaperate. I was so focused on what you might be giving up that I couldn't see what you were gaining." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But watching you tonight, seeing how proud you were, how naturally you connected with my students, how much you've grown in your own career while supporting mine, I finally understand something important. What's that? I asked, my heart starting to race. We're not just surviving the challenges of an unconventional relationship. We're thriving because of them. The age difference that everyone worried about has actually been one of our greatest strengths. I bring life experience and emotional stability. You bring fresh perspective and optimism. Together, we're stronger than either of us could be alone. The relief I felt was so profound it was almost physical. We'd both struggled with doubts over the years, moments when the weight of other people's expectations or our own insecurities threatened to undermine what we'd built. But here was Sarah, articulating something I'd felt but never been able to express. That our differences weren't obstacles to overcome, but gifts to celebrate. I've been thinking the same thing, I said, squeezing her hand. Remember when your ex-husband showed up at the school and accused you of having a midlife crisis? I was so angry because he couldn't see what I saw, that you weren't trying to recapture your youth. You were finally becoming who you were always meant to be. Sarah smiled at the memory. And remember when your college friends came to visit? Last year, and kept making jokes about you dating your professor? You didn't get defensive or try to minimize our relationship. You just said that emotional maturity was more attractive to you than chronological youth. We'd both learned to respond to criticism with confidence rather than defensiveness. To see skepticism as an opportunity to demonstrate the strength of our bond rather than evidence of its weakness. The people who mattered had eventually come around, and those who didn't had revealed themselves to be less important than we'd initially thought. There's something else, Sarah said, her voice taking on a note I hadn't heard before. Something I've been wanting to discuss with you for a while now. My pulse quickened again, but this time with anticipation rather than fear. The consulting work you've been doing has been incredibly successful. You're getting offers from firms across the country, recognition for your innovative approaches. To sustainable design, you have options now that you didn't have 3 years ago. I do, I agreed, not sure where she was heading with this. And I'm grateful for all of it. But Sarah, if you're worried that success is going to change how I feel about us or this life we've built, you're wrong. Everything I've accomplished has been made possible by having you as my partner. That's not what I'm worried about, she said quickly. What I'm worried about is that you're still limiting yourself because of me, still making choices based on what's best for our relationship rather than what's best for your career. And I don't want that anymore. The conversation was taking a turn I hadn't expected, and I felt a flutter of panic in my chest. Sarah, what are you saying exactly? She took a deep breath and turned to face me fully. I'm saying that I want you to start thinking bigger. I want you to consider opportunities that might require us to take risks, to make changes, to step outside our comfort zone. Like what? I asked, though I had a suspicion I knew where this was going. Like the offer you got last month from that renewable energy startup in Colorado? The one you turned down without even discussing it with me? I'd been hoping she hadn't noticed my lack of enthusiasm when that particular opportunity had come. Up, Sarah. That job would mean starting over in a new city, leaving behind everything we've built here. Your program at the school, our house, our friends, your family. She nodded slowly. All of that is true. It would also mean you'd be working on projects that could genuinely change how cities approach sustainable development. It would mean being part of something revolutionary instead of just consulting on incremental improvements. The weight of what she was suggesting settled over me like a blanket. Sarah was essentially asking me to prioritize my career ambitions over our current stability, to take a leap that would disrupt both our lives for the sake of my professional growth. 3 years ago, I might have dismissed the idea immediately, too focused on protecting what we had to consider what we might gain. But I'd learned something important about Sarah over the years. She didn't make suggestions lightly, especially ones that involve major life changes. If she was bringing this up, it meant she'd been thinking about it seriously, weighing the pros and cons, considering all the implications. Would you really be willing to leave Connecticut? I asked. Start over somewhere new, just so I could pursue a better job opportunity? Sarah reached up and cupped my face in her hands, her touch warm and reassuring. Marcus, do you remember what you told me the night we decided to try being together? You said that you wanted someone who would challenge you and support you, and make you want to be better than you were. I remember, I said, leaning into her touch. Well, part of challenging and supporting you means not letting you settle for safe when you could reach for extraordinary. You spent the last 3 years proving that unconventional choices can lead to incredible outcomes. Why would you stop taking risks now? The logic was sound, but the emotional implications were staggering. Moving across the country would mean leaving behind the community that had finally accepted us, the family relationships we'd worked so hard to build, the professional networks we'd both cultivated. It would mean starting over in a place where we'd be strangers again, where we'd have to prove ourselves all over again. But it would also mean new adventures, fresh challenges, and the chance to build something even better than what we currently had. And if there was one thing our relationship had taught me, it was that the things worth having were rarely the things that came easily. What about your work here? I asked. The art therapy program you've built, the students who depend on you. Sarah smiled, and I could see excitement beginning to build behind her initial nervousness. The program is established now. I've trained other teachers to carry it forward. There are schools in Colorado that need exactly what I've learned to provide. I could start new programs, reach different populations, maybe even develop training curricula for other districts. She'd clearly been thinking about this far longer than I'd realized, working through the practical implications and envisioning possibilities I hadn't even considered. Once again, I was struck by how well she knew me, how accurately she could predict what I needed, even when I couldn't see it myself. Are you sure about this? I asked, searching her face for any sign of doubt or reluctance. Because once we start down this path, there's no going back. We'd be leaving behind everything familiar and comfortable. Sarah leaned forward and kissed me softly, her lips warm against mine. Marcus, comfortable isn't the same as happy. Been comfortable here, and that's been wonderful, but I think we're both ready for something more. As we finally got out of the car and walked toward our house, I felt a familiar sense of excitement building in my chest. It was the same feeling I'd had 3 years ago when I'd first admitted to myself that I was falling in love with my neighbor. The same electricity I'd felt when we'd decided to take a chance on each other despite all the reasons it shouldn't work. So what do we do now? I asked, as we stood on our front porch, keys in hand. Sarah grinned, looking more animated than I'd seen her in months. Now we call Colorado and tell them you're interested in discussing the position. We research neighborhoods, in schools and art communities. We start planning the next chapter of our adventure. Just like that? I asked, marveling at her confidence. Just like that, she confirmed. Because if there's one thing we've learned over the past 3 years, it's that the best things in life require courage. And Marcus, we've got courage in abundance. As we walked into our house, already mentally preparing for the conversations and decisions that lay ahead, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the woman beside me. Sarah had entered my life as an unexpected complication, a relationship that defied conventional wisdom and challenged everyone's expectations. But she'd become so much more than that. She'd become my partner in the truest sense, someone who pushed me to grow while accepting who I was, supported my dreams while refusing to let me settle for less than my potential. She'd taught me that love wasn't about finding someone to complete you, but about finding someone to explore life's possibilities with. And now, as we stood on the threshold of another major decision, another leap of faith, I couldn't imagine facing it with anyone else. Whatever came next, wherever the road led us, we'd travel it together. And that was enough to make any risk worth taking. 5 years later, I stood on the deck of our mountain home in Boulder, Colorado, watching the sunrise paint the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The view never got old, even after 3 years of waking up to it every morning. Low, in the valley, the city was beginning to stir, and I could see the solar panel arrays we'd helped design glinting in the early light, like a field of mirrors reflecting hope back to the sky. Sarah appeared beside me with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, her hair now showing threads of silver that she'd stopped trying to hide. At 57, she was more beautiful than ever, her face marked by laugh lines and the kind of deep contentment that comes from living authentically. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, settling into the chair beside mine. Just thinking about how different everything is from what I imagined 5 years ago, I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. When we made the decision to move here, I thought the biggest challenge would be adjusting to a new job and a new city. Never anticipated how much we'd both change in the process. The move to Colorado had been transformative in ways neither of us had predicted. My work with Rocky Mountain Renewable Energy had evolved far beyond engineering consulting. I'd become the company's director of community engagement, traveling across the western states to help towns and cities develop sustainable energy infrastructure. The job combined technical expertise with public speaking and community organizing, skills I'd never known I possessed until Sarah encouraged me to stretch beyond my comfort zone. But the real surprise had been Sarah's trajectory. Within 6 months of our arrival, she'd been recruited by the University of Colorado to develop their first graduate program in art therapy. What had started as a consulting position had grown into a full professorship, complete with research funding and a team of graduate students who looked at her with the kind of reverence usually reserved for rock stars. "Do you ever miss the simplicity of our early days?" Sarah asked, curling her legs up under her in that way that made her look decades younger. "When our biggest worry was whether your parents approved of us?" I considered the question seriously. Those early years had been intense, but relatively straightforward. Two people figuring out how to love each other despite external obstacles. Now our lives were more complex, filled with professional obligations, travel schedules, and the kind of success that brought its own set of challenges. But complexity wasn't the same as difficulty, and I'd learned to appreciate the richness that came with building a life of purpose. Alongside someone who shared your values, I missed the intensity of those early discoveries, I said finally. The excitement of learning everything about each other, the way every conversation felt like an adventure. But I wouldn't trade what we have now for anything. We've moved beyond just loving each other to actually building something meaningful together. It was true. Over the past 3 years, Sarah and I had collaborated on projects that neither of us could have accomplished alone. Her research into art therapy for trauma survivors had been enhanced by my engineering background, leading to innovative approaches that combined creative expression with biometric feedback. My community engagement work had been enriched by her understanding of group dynamics and therapeutic communication. We'd co-authored papers, co-presented at conferences, and co-founded a nonprofit organization that brought art therapy programs to underserved communities across the Mountain West. The work was challenging and sometimes exhausting, but it felt like we were making a genuine difference in people's lives. "Speaking of building something meaningful," Sarah said, pulling an envelope from her pocket, "this came yesterday while you were in Denver." I recognized the letterhead immediately. The MacArthur Foundation. My heart started racing as I realized what this might be. 6 months earlier, someone had nominated Sarah for a MacArthur Fellowship, the so-called genius grant that recognized individuals making extraordinary contributions to their fields. The nomination had come as a complete surprise, and Sarah had insisted it was probably just a courtesy acknowledgement that wouldn't lead anywhere. "Well," I said, gesturing toward the envelope, "are you going to open it, or should I?" Sarah's hands were actually trembling as she tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. I watched her face as she read, seeing her expression shift from nervous anticipation to shock to pure joy. "I got it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Marcus, I actually got it." She handed me the letter with shaking hands, and I read the formal notification that Dr. Sarah Martinez had been selected as a MacArthur Fellow in recognition of her groundbreaking work in developing community-based art therapy interventions for trauma survivors. The financial award was substantial, but the recognition was priceless. Sarah had joined the ranks of scientists, artists, and social innovators whose work was reshaping their fields. At 57, after years of being told she was too old for new opportunities, she'd achieved one of the highest honors available in academic research. "This is incredible," I said, pulling her into my arms. "Sarah, do you understand what this means? You're officially a genius. The MacArthur Foundation has declared it." She laughed through tears that were now flowing freely. "It means I get to keep doing the work I love for the next 5 years without worrying about funding." It means the program will be able to expand to communities we never thought we could reach. But I could see something else in her expression, a mixture of pride and disbelief that spoke to deeper issues. It also means, she continued more quietly, that maybe I was wrong about my best years being behind me. Maybe they're actually just beginning. Vulnerability in her voice reminded me of how far we'd both traveled from those early days when she'd worried about holding me back. "Sarah," I said, cupping her face in my hands, "your best years aren't behind you or ahead of you. It's there right now. Every day that you choose to keep growing and learning and contributing to the world. Age has nothing to do with it." She leaned into my touch and closed her eyes. "I know that intellectually, but there's still a part of me that can't quite believe this is real. 5 years ago, I was a divorced high school teacher starting over at 52. Now I'm a MacArthur Fellow with a research program that's being studied by universities across the country. And 5 years ago, I was a junior engineer living in suburban Connecticut, afraid to take risks or challenge conventional expectations," I added. "Now I'm running community engagement for renewable energy projects across 7 states. We've both become people we couldn't have imagined being. It was a lesson we'd learned over and over, that growth doesn't stop at any particular age, that reinvention is possible at every stage of life, and that the most extraordinary achievements often come after periods of seeming setback or starting over." The phone started ringing inside the house, probably colleagues and friends who'd seen the MacArthur announcement online. Sarah's achievement would be covered in academic journals and local news outlets, bringing attention to the work we'd been doing together. But for now, I wanted to savor this moment of private celebration before the world rushed in with congratulations and interview requests. "What do you want to do first?" I asked, as we heard the answering machine pick up another call. "How do you want to celebrate this incredible achievement?" Sarah stood up and walked to the deck railing, looking out over the mountains that had become our backdrop for daily inspiration. "I want to call my daughter Jessica," she said. "I want to tell her that it's never too late to surprise yourself, that the dreams you put aside can sometimes come back bigger than you ever imagined." Jessica had moved to Portland 2 years earlier to start her own graphic design firm. Inspired partly by watching her mother's career renaissance, "I want to call your parents and thank them for raising a son who taught me that age is just a number when it comes to pursuing your passions," Sarah continued. "And I want to plan our next adventure because this fellowship is going to open doors we haven't even thought of yet." The phone rang again, and this time Sarah went inside to answer it. I could hear her excited voice as she spoke with whoever was on the other end. Probably a colleague or journalist wanting to discuss the implications of her award. But I stayed on the deck, thinking about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 7 years ago, I'd been a young man mowing his lawn and stealing glances at an attractive older neighbor. I'd thought I was looking for romance, maybe even love if I was lucky. I'd had no idea I was actually finding a partner who would challenge me to become the best version of myself. It would push me to take risks I never would have considered alone. Sarah had entered my life as someone who insisted she was too old for new beginnings, to set in her ways for major changes, too realistic to believe in fairy tale endings. But she'd become living proof that transformation is possible at any age. That the most meaningful work often comes after years of preparation and experience. Not that love isn't about finding someone to complete you, but about finding someone to explore unlimited possibilities with. The MacArthur Fellowship wasn't just recognition of Sarah's individual achievement. It was validation of everything we'd believed about the power of partnership to amplify individual potential. Her research had been strengthened by my technical background. My community work had been enhanced by her understanding of human psychology. Together, we'd accomplished things that neither of us could have done alone. Sarah reappeared on the deck, her face flushed with excitement. That was Dr. Peterson from the Foundation. They want to feature our collaborative work in their next newsletter. Apparently, our model of combining engineering and therapy approaches is being replicated by other fellows in different fields. The recognition felt surreal, but it also felt earned. We'd spent years building credibility in our respective fields, learning from failures and setbacks, refining our approaches through trial and error. The success hadn't come overnight or easily. It had come through persistence, collaboration, and the willingness to keep taking risks even when the outcome was uncertain. "There's something else," Sarah said, her tone becoming more serious. The fellowship comes with opportunities to establish new programs, to work with communities internationally. Dr. Peterson mentioned pilot projects in South America and Southeast Asia, places where trauma-informed art therapy could make a huge difference. I felt that familiar flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness that accompanied major life decisions. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" I asked. Sarah smiled, the same adventurous expression I'd seen when she'd encouraged me to consider the Colorado opportunity 5 years earlier. "I'm saying that maybe it's time for us to think even bigger. Maybe domestic success is just the beginning of what we could accomplish together." The idea of international work was both thrilling and terrifying. It would mean more travel, more time apart, more challenges to navigate as a couple. But it would also mean the chance to take our model to communities that desperately needed innovative approaches to healing and development. What would that look like practically? I asked, my engineering mind already working through logistics. My company has been talking about expanding internationally. There's a huge demand for renewable energy expertise in developing countries. Maybe we could coordinate our work, find places where sustainable infrastructure and community healing programs could be implemented together. Sarah's eyes lit up at the possibility. Imagine communities that are rebuilding after conflict or natural disaster, getting both the technical infrastructure they need and the therapeutic support to process their trauma. We could help create models for holistic recovery that address both practical and emotional needs. The scope of what she was describing was breathtaking. It would mean leaving behind the comfortable life we'd built in Boulder, stepping once again into uncertainty and challenge. But it would also mean the chance to apply everything we'd learned on a global scale, to prove that the principles that had guided our personal and professional partnership could make a difference in communities around the world. "Are you ready for another adventure?" Sarah asked, reaching for my hand. "Because I have a feeling this is just the beginning of what we could accomplish together." I looked at this remarkable woman who'd entered my life as an impossible love story and become the most important partnership I'd ever known. At 34, I was supposedly in the prime of my career, the age when conventional wisdom said I should be focusing on stability and advancement within established systems. But conventional wisdom had never served us well. Every major breakthrough in our relationship and our work had come from choosing possibility over predictability, growth over comfort. "I'm ready," I said, squeezing her hand. "But this time, let's make sure we're making the decision together from the beginning. No more one of us convincing the other to take risks. This has to be something we both want equally." Sarah nodded, understanding the importance of what I was saying. Our relationship had evolved from the early days, and she'd worried about holding me back, or I'd worried about proving myself worthy of her experience. We'd become true partners, equals who brought different strengths to shared goals. Any major decision going forward had to honor that equality. "Together then," she said, lifting her coffee mug in a toast. "To the next chapter of our impossible love story." I clinked my mug against hers, feeling the same sense of anticipation I'd felt 7 years ago when she'd first said my name. "To proving that the best adventures are the ones you never see coming," I replied. As the sun climbed higher over the Rockies, illuminating the valley where we'd built our life together, I realized that our story wasn't about age or conventional expectations or any of the obstacles that had seemed so important in the beginning. It was about two people who'd chosen to keep growing together, who'd refused to accept limitations based on other people's assumptions, and who'd discovered that love wasn't just about finding happiness, but about creating purpose. Whatever came next, wherever the fellowship and our partnership took us, we'd face it with the confidence that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be, with exactly the person you're meant to explore the world with. The future stretched ahead of us, full of possibility and promise, and I couldn't wait to see what we'd discover together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.